Before we get into the story, if you're new here, welcome to Ivory Secrets. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below. Tell me what city you're watching from. I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, let's talk about a woman named Sloane. Wait, that's not right. Let me start over. Because the way this story begins is not with a woman walking out a door. It begins with a woman standing very still in a kitchen at 6 in the morning, listening to her husband laugh at something, his phone said, and realizing, with absolute quiet clarity, that she had not heard that laugh directed at her in over 3 years. Her name was Delia Marsh, 41 years old. She had the kind of face people called striking rather than beautiful. Angular jaw, dark eyes that held more than they gave away, hair she kept pulled back because she simply didn't think about it much anymore. She had grown up in Fredericton, New Brunswick, the daughter of a woman who repaired watches and a father who read every single label at the grocery store. She was methodical. She was patient. She had a master's degree in materials engineering from Dalhousie that she had never once mentioned to the man she married, because the man she married had asked her what she studied on their third date, and then pivoted to talking about himself before she finished the sentence. She had noticed that. She had filed it away. She married him anyway, because she was 34 and because he had a good jaw and a generous laugh. A laugh he used to aim at her, once, and because she had been, at that particular moment in her life, a little tired of being alone. His name was Roland Fitch. He was 46, a partner at a commercial real estate firm in Toronto, and he had what his colleagues called presence, the kind of man who entered a room and immediately began scanning it for the most important person in it. For the first 2 years, Delia had thought she was that person. It took her longer than it should have to understand that the most important person in any room, for Roland, was always Roland. She poured her coffee. He did not look up. This is where we begin. What Roland did not know, what he had never asked, was that 3 years into their marriage, Delia had quietly started working again, not in the way she'd worked before, consulting for a mid-size firm that tested composite materials for aerospace. This was different. This was a small company she'd incorporated under her maiden name, Marsh Materials, registered in Nova Scotia. Operating out of a studio apartment she rented for $800 a month in Dartmouth. She had taken a single initial investment, $22,000 of her own savings, and she had begun solving a problem that the construction industry had been fumbling with for over a decade: thermal bridging in high-rise buildings, the point where heat escapes through the bones of a structure. The invisible flaw that costs building owners millions in energy loss every year. She had an idea about it. She had always had an idea about it. She just hadn't had space to work on it, and then she'd had space and she'd used it. She told Roland she volunteered 2 days a week at a community science program for kids in Scarborough. This was also true. She did both things. She was very organized. The commute to Dartmouth was not possible every week, so she had set up a partnership with 2 engineers she trusted, both former colleagues, and she oversaw the work remotely. And she flew east once a month. Roland assumed these trips were for her mother, who lived in Moncton and was genuinely getting older. He never asked what she worked on when her mother was asleep. By the time of the morning we're talking about, Roland at the kitchen island, thumb-scrolling, laughing quietly at his phone. Marsh Materials had a pending patent on a thermal break composite that had just been independently tested and validated by a lab in Waterloo. She had 2 letters of intent from developers. One of them was for a project in Calgary worth $68 million. She poured her coffee, and she did not say a word. She had known about the other woman for 8 months. Her name, the other woman's name, was Petra, and she worked in Roland's firm, in acquisitions, and she was 31 years old and wore the kind of blazers that suggested she had never once in her life second-guessed a purchase. Delia knew about her because she had received an accidental text. Roland had meant to send it to a contact named P, and had instead sent it to a group thread that included Delia, his mother, and his sister Viv. It said, "Can't wait for Friday. Book the one we liked." His mother had responded with a recipe for lemon bars. His sister Viv had texted Delia, privately, 40 minutes later. "Did you see that?" Delia had written back, "Yes." Viv had written, "I'm so sorry. Delia had written, "Thank you." And then she had put her phone face down on the counter, and she sat for a very long time in the room that Roland called the library, but that was mostly just a room with a leather chair and a shelf of books he'd bought for how they looked. And she had thought carefully about what she wanted to do next. She did not cry. This is not because she was cold. She had cried later. Once, in the Dartmouth studio, with the door locked and the radiator knocking and a coffee going cold on the workbench beside her. She cried for almost 20 minutes. Then she washed her face and went back to the problem she'd been working on, which was optimizing the bonding layer on a prototype panel, and the crying and the work were not disconnected. They were the same thing somehow. Both were true. Both mattered. She did not confront Roland. She did not change anything, visibly. She watched, she thought. She waited, not out of weakness, but out of the same instinct that had made her a good engineer. You do not dismantle its structure before you understand what's holding it up. The annual Fitch & Rowe Client Gala was held every March at the Arcadian Court in Toronto. Roland had gone every year since making partner. He expected Delia to attend, and she always had, in a black dress, with a pleasant expression, making the rounds with the surgical efficiency of someone who knew exactly what was expected of her and delivered it with no excess. This year was different. She had received 3 weeks before the gala a formal invitation from the Urban Development Institute of Canada, not for the gala, for an award, the UDI Excellence Award for Innovation in Building Materials. Her name, her real name, Delia Marsh, was on the certificate. The letter was addressed to the founder of Marsh Materials. Her contact at UDI was extremely apologetic about the short lead time. The original recipient had declined due to a health issue, and the committee wanted to reach the next name on their shortlist immediately. The ceremony was on the same night as the Fitch & Rowe Gala, also at the Arcadian Court, 1 floor up. She sat with the letter in her hands for a long time. She thought about what it meant. She thought about coincidence and about the way life occasionally arranges itself with the dramatic economy of a very good short story. She thought about Roland's face. She accepted. She did not tell Roland. She RSVP'd to both events, the gala downstairs and the awards ceremony upstairs. And she bought a dress she had never worn before, deep green, with shoulders, the kind of dress that was not about blending in. She called her friend Bea. Beatrice was the only person in Toronto who knew everything, who had been told everything, who had held the information with the discretion of someone who understood the difference between keeping a secret and helping someone hurt themselves. Bea said, when she heard the plan, Oh, this is going to be something." The night of the gala, Roland was in a good mood. He wore his charcoal suit. He stood in front of the mirror and adjusted his tie and said, without looking at her, "You look fine." He meant it as a compliment. She had stopped explaining this to herself. The car was arranged. The driver's name was something beginning with M. Roland, talked on his phone the entire way downtown. At the Arcadian Court, they separated almost immediately. Roland moved toward the bar, toward his colleagues, toward the particular gravitational field of men who knew each other's golf handicaps and real estate portfolios, and very little else. Delia accepted a glass of sparkling water. She talked to a woman named Frances, the CFO of a pension fund, who was funny and wry and talked about her grandchildren in Winnipeg. She talked to a man whose name she forgot immediately, but who had strong opinions about the Gardiner Expressway. She was pleasant. She was present. She was, as she always was in rooms like this, watching. She saw Petra at 7:20. She had known she would be there. Petra was in acquisitions. She worked with the firm, of course she would be there, but knowing and seeing are different things. Petra was across the room in a cream blazer over a black dress, and she was laughing at something Roland was saying, and Roland was leaning toward her the way he used to lean toward Delia. That particular angle of the shoulders, that meant you are the most interesting thing in this room to me right now. Delia watched this for approximately 4 seconds. Then she set her glass down very carefully on a nearby table, and she walked toward the elevator bank. She had an award to collect. The UDI ceremony was on the 14th floor, in the Windsor Room, which had dark wood paneling and the kind of lighting that made everyone look like they were in a painting. There were perhaps 90 people in the room. engineers, architects, developers, people who built things for a living, who spent their careers thinking about how buildings breathe and fail and endure. She was met at the door by a young woman with a clipboard who recognized her name and smiled with genuine warmth. She was shown to a table. She was introduced to 3 people she had communicated with by email for months, but never met in person: her Waterloo contacts, the 2 engineers who had validated the prototype, and the introductions felt like finding rooms in a house you'd built but never walked through. The award was presented at 8:30. The ceremony was brief and sensible in the way that Canadian professional events usually are. No pyrotechnics, no excessive amplification, a keynote that was genuinely interesting and ran only 4 minutes over. When Delia's name was called, she walked to the front of the room without hurrying. She had prepared something short. She said it. She thanked the engineers who had worked with her. She said their names, both of them, with the specificity that made clear she knew exactly what they had contributed. She said something about thermal bridging that she had been waiting years to say to an audience that would understand it. She made one small joke about insulation that got a real laugh. She held the award, which was heavier than she'd expected, and she looked out at the room, and for the first time in longer than she could name, she felt not triumph. Exactly, not relief. Something quieter than both. Something that felt like, of course, this is what was real. She returned to her table. Someone poured her wine. She stayed for the rest of the ceremony and talked to a developer from Edmonton who had interesting things to say about the future of modular housing, and she forgot, for a stretch of perhaps 40 minutes, about Roland entirely. She had not planned what happened next. She had thought she would simply go back downstairs, retrieve her coat, say goodnight to Roland with the smooth efficiency of every other gala she'd attended, and arrange to speak to him the following week with a lawyer already briefed. That was the plan. What happened was that the elevator opened on the wrong floor. It opened on 11, not on the main level, and when the doors pulled back, Roland was standing there in the corridor with Petra, and their conversation stopped with the particular sharp quality of a sentence that does not want to be overheard. Petra's hand was withdrawing from somewhere near Roland's arm. The adjustment was small. It was everything. Roland saw Delia. He saw the award in her hands. He saw the dress. In the space of approximately 2 seconds, his face moved through an expression she had never seen on him before. Not guilt, exactly, but the very particular look of a person who has just understood that they have profoundly misjudged a situation, that they have been operating on assumptions that were wrong, and that the wrongness is not small. Delia, he said. She looked at him. She looked at Petra, who was now studying a point somewhere on the wall to her left. She pressed the button for the lobby. What is? Roland started. What are you doing here? Collecting something, she said. The doors began to close. She did not hold them. She had a lawyer by the end of November. Her name was Agnes. No, her name is not in the file, we're fine. Her name was Josephine Hartwell, and she practiced family law in Halifax, and she had the demeanor of someone who had heard every version of every story, and still found each one worth her full attention. Delia had been referred to her by Bea, who knew everyone. The process was not fast. It wasn't meant to be. There was property. There was a joint account with 17 years of shared finances folded into it like origami, tight, layered, requiring careful hands to unfold. There was a house in Rosedale that Roland had bought before the marriage, but that Delia's name had been added to 4 years in. During a moment of what she now understood was performance rather than intention, she moved into the Dartmouth studio. She bought a proper desk. She bought a lamp she genuinely liked, a thing she had stopped doing during the marriage, buying things she genuinely liked, rather than things that would blend into the particular aesthetic Roland had decided on for their life. She started sleeping well. This surprised her a little. She had expected grief to be louder. She had expected something that required more managing. What she found instead was that the grief had been happening for a long time already, quietly, like a leak in the wall. The kind that doesn't announce itself, that just slowly changes the temperature of a room. She had been managing it for years. The divorce was not the beginning of the loss. It was the end of pretending there wasn't one. Roland called, twice. She did not answer. She had nothing to say that Josephine wasn't already saying for her, more precisely and with better documentation. Marsh Materials finalized the Calgary contract in January. $68 million. A 14-story mixed residential and commercial development in the Beltline neighborhood. They would supply the thermal brake composite for the entire envelope. It was, her partner Clive said on the phone when the news came in, the kind of contract that changed the shape of what a company could be. She was in the studio when the call came. She was wearing paint-stained jeans and an old Dalhousie sweatshirt. She had a cup of tea, going cold on the corner of the desk. She wrote the number down on the legal pad she used for notes, looked at it for a moment, and then said, "Okay?" Clive laughed. "That's it? Okay?" "It's a good word," she said. "It covers it." She was not performing humility. She was genuinely, quietly satisfied. The way you are when something you believed about, for a long time, turns out to have been worth believing, not surprise. Recognition. She heard about Roland through Viv. Viv texted in February. "Petra's gone. She moved to Vancouver. Just so you know." Delia read the text while waiting for a flight at Halifax Stanfield. She thought about typing something back, and then she just sent a small heart and put her phone in her bag. She did not feel triumph about this. She had thought she might, and she didn't. What she felt was closer to the particular absence of feeling you get when you put down something heavy you've been carrying for a long time. Not joy, not relief exactly, just the uncomplicated awareness that your hands are free now. She boarded her plane. She had a meeting in Calgary in the morning. Roland emailed once, in March. It was not an apology. It was not an apology. It was the kind of message a person writes when they know they owe something, but cannot entirely name it. 3 paragraphs that moved in careful circles around the specific words he could not bring himself to use. He mentioned the award. He said he had read about Marsh Materials in an industry newsletter. He said, near the end, "I didn't know. I should have asked." She read it twice. She wrote back 6 words, "You're right. I hope you're well." She meant both things. She was not performing graciousness. She genuinely hoped he was well in the abstract way. You hope strangers are well, warmly, vaguely, without investment. He had been a chapter of her life, and the chapter had ended. And what remained was not hatred, not bitterness, not the grinding persistence of injury. What remained was space, room to work, a desk with a lamp she liked, a company with her real name on the door. She presented at a conference in Ottawa in the spring. The panel was on sustainable building, envelopes, not a glamorous topic, which she had always appreciated about her field. People in engineering tend to care about whether something works rather than whether it sounds important. She found this restful. After the panel, a woman in the front row came forward and introduced herself as a graduate student at Carleton, working on a thesis about passive house design in northern climates. She wanted to know how Delia had balanced the thermal performance requirements with the structural load tolerances. A specific technical question, the kind that requires actual reading to arrive at. They talked for 45 minutes in the corridor, outside the conference room. Delia was late for a dinner she had been mildly dreading. She didn't mind. On the train, back to Halifax that evening, she opened her notebook and wrote down 2 things from the conversation that she wanted to follow up on. The student's name, she had given Delia her card, was attached to an idea about vapor diffusion that was, honestly, interesting, possibly worth a conversation with Clive. She looked out the window at Ontario, moving past in the dark. She thought, this is the life, not dramatically, not with relief or vindication or any of the large emotions that the circumstances might seem to demand, just quietly, plainly, the way you note that the temperature is comfortable or that the coffee is exactly right. This is the life. She put the notebook away and watched the dark and let herself arrive, without hurry, at wherever she was going next.